The conference room fell into absolute silence as the boardroom doors swung open, revealing a figure that made my brother Damien's face drain of all color. The CEO of Meridian Industries, our biggest client, stepped aside with a satisfied smile as I walked into the room wearing my best navy power suit, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who had earned every step. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ladies and gentlemen, announced CEO Harrison Vale, his voice carrying the authority of someone who controlled a $500 million empire, I'd like you to meet the new Chief Executive Officer of Celestial Dynamics, Natalie Rivers. The silence that followed was deafening. 12 board members turned their heads in unison, their expressions cycling from confusion to recognition to absolute shock. But it was Damien's reaction that made every sleepless night, every moment of humiliation, every tear I'd shed over the past 6 months worth it. My older brother, the man who had fired me in front of our entire team, who had called me dead weight and suggested I find a job more suited to my limited capabilities, sat frozen in his executive chair, his mouth slightly open, his hands gripping the conference table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. 3 months ago, I had been Natalie Rivers, Senior Vice President of Operations at Rivers & Associates Marketing, a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Phoenix that my brother had inherited from our father. I had a corner office on the 15th floor, a team of 12 talented professionals who respected my leadership, and what I thought was an unshakable position in the family business that bore our name. I had dedicated 7 years of my life to building that company, working 60-hour weeks, bringing in major clients, and consistently exceeding every performance metric that mattered. Today, I was Natalie Rivers, CEO of Celestial Dynamics, the fastest-growing digital marketing conglomerate in the Southwest, with offices in Austin, Denver, and San Diego, and a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. More importantly, I was now the CEO of the company that Damien's firm desperately needed as a client to avoid bankruptcy, and the woman who held his professional future in her hands. The irony was so perfect, it felt like divine intervention. Natalie, continued Harrison, oblivious to the family drama unfolding in front of him, has been instrumental in developing our new integrated marketing strategy. Her innovative approach to cross-platform digital campaigns has increased our client engagement by 340% over the past quarter. We're confident that under her leadership, Celestial Dynamics will become the premier marketing partner for companies like Meridian Industries. I smiled politely, my expression giving nothing away as I took my seat at the head of the conference table, the same table where Damien had once told potential clients that I was learning the ropes and still developing my expertise, despite having an MBA from Northwestern and more industry certifications than anyone else in his company. The same table where he had dismissed my strategic recommendations as too ambitious and unrealistic, while taking credit for the few ideas of mine he did implement. Now I sat at the head of that table as the CEO of his biggest potential client, watching him struggle to process the complete reversal of our positions. I believe you already know each other, Harrison said with a casual wave toward Damien, clearly unaware of the earthquake he had just triggered. Damien Rivers from Rivers & Associates has been eager to discuss a partnership opportunity with us, something about his firm's capacity to handle large-scale campaigns for companies of our size. Damien cleared his throat, his usual confident demeanor completely absent, as he attempted to speak. Natalie, this is unexpected. His voice cracked slightly on my name, as if he couldn't quite believe he was addressing me as an equal, or rather, as his superior. Hello, Damien, I replied smoothly, my tone professional and cool. It's good to see you again. I understand you're interested in working with celestial dynamics." The words hung in the air like a challenge. 6 months ago, Damien had told me I would never succeed outside of his company, that I lacked the vision and leadership skills necessary to build something meaningful on my own. He had suggested that firing me was an act of kindness, saving me from the embarrassment of inevitable failure in a competitive industry where only the strong survived. "Your track record will speak for itself," he had said during that humiliating meeting, his voice dripping with the condescending authority of someone who had never questioned his right to make decisions about other people's lives. And unfortunately, that track record doesn't demonstrate the kind of strategic thinking we need at the executive level. Now, as I looked across the table at my brother's pale, shocked face, I remembered every word of that conversation. Every dismissive comment, every undermining remark, every moment when he had made me feel small and incompetent despite my obvious contributions to his company's success. For years, I had endured his subtle sabotage and overt disrespect, telling myself that family loyalty was more important than personal pride, that building something together was worth the sacrifice of my individual recognition. But Damien had made a critical miscalculation. He had underestimated not just my capabilities, but my connections, my reputation in the industry, and my determination to prove him wrong. When he fired me, he thought he was eliminating a problem and streamlining his operations. Instead, he had freed me to become his biggest competitor, and now, potentially, the person who controlled his company's survival. "Before we dive into the specifics of any potential partnership," I said, opening the leather portfolio in front of me with deliberate precision, "I'd like to review Rivers and Associates' recent performance metrics and client retention statistics. As you can imagine, Celestial Dynamics maintains very high standards for our strategic partners." The color drained from Damien's face as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was a reckoning. The little sister he had dismissed and humiliated was now sitting in judgment of his company's worthiness to work with her organization. Harrison leaned back in his chair, completely oblivious to the family dynamics playing out in front of him. "I'm sure you'll find Rivers and Associates meets your standards, Natalie. Damien has been very persistent about his firm's capabilities." "I'm sure he has," I replied, allowing the slightest hint of amusement to color my voice. "Persistence is certainly one of my brother's defining characteristics." The word brother landed like a bombshell in the conference room. Harrison's eyebrows shot up in surprise, while the other board members exchanged meaningful glances as they began to understand the subtext of what they were witnessing. But it was Damien's reaction that satisfied me most. For the first time in my adult life, I watched my older brother, the golden child who had inherited our father's business, who had always been treated as the natural leader despite my superior education and performance, look genuinely afraid. And we hadn't even gotten to the best part yet. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Natalie Rivers, and 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and where my life was heading. I was the 29-year-old Senior Vice President of Operations at Rivers and Associates Marketing, a woman who had clawed her way up from Junior Account Coordinator to the executive suite through sheer determination and results that spoke louder than office politics. I wasn't born into privilege or handed opportunities on a silver platter. While my older brother Damien was groomed from childhood to inherit our father's advertising agency, I was the afterthought, the daughter who was encouraged to pursue practical career options like teaching or nursing. But I had other plans. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through Arizona State University, graduated cum laude with a degree in business administration, then earned my MBA from Northwestern while working full-time at a small marketing firm in Chicago. When I returned to Phoenix 7 years ago, I joined Rivers and Associates not because of family connections, but because I had something to prove. I wanted to show my father, who had always favored Damien, that his daughter could be just as valuable to the family business as his son, maybe more valuable. And for 7 years, I proved exactly that. I was the one who landed Southwestern Bank as a client, bringing in $2.3 million in annual revenue through a comprehensive rebranding campaign that won 3 industry awards. I was the one who developed our digital transformation strategy, moving the company from traditional print advertising into social media marketing and influencer partnerships just as the industry was shifting. I was the one who built relationships with key vendors, negotiated better rates with media outlets, and consistently exceeded every performance target the company set. My team of 12 marketing professionals didn't just respect me, they were fiercely loyal. Amanda Thornton, my creative director, had turned down offers from larger agencies to stay and work under my leadership. Jake Morrison, our data analytics specialist, credited me with teaching him strategic thinking that transformed his career trajectory. These weren't just employees, they were talented professionals who chose to follow my vision because they believed in what we were building together. I specialized in something that many marketing executives struggled with: translating complex business objectives into compelling brand narratives that actually drove revenue. While other agencies focused on flashy campaigns that looked impressive in award shows, my strategies delivered measurable results. My campaigns didn't just increase brand awareness, they increased market share, customer retention, and bottom-line profits for our clients. The numbers backed up my reputation. Under my direct oversight, client retention rates increased from 67% to 94%. Revenue from my accounts grew by an average of 156% year over year. I had personal relationships with CEOs and marketing directors at companies throughout the Southwest, relationships built on trust, results, and the kind of strategic insight that comes from genuinely understanding both marketing psychology and business fundamentals. But more than my professional achievements, I was proud of the culture I had helped create at Rivers & Associates. My team operated like a well-oiled machine, with open communication, collaborative problem-solving, and a shared commitment to excellence that made coming to work feel like pursuing a mission rather than just collecting a paycheck. I thought I was building something permanent. I thought my contributions were valued and recognized. I thought my brother Damien, who had officially become CEO when our father stepped back from daily operations 3 years earlier, understood that my success was his success, that my expertise made his company stronger and more competitive. I was naive enough to believe that competence and results mattered more than family politics and personal insecurities. I was wrong about everything. The first sign that my position wasn't as secure as I believed came during our quarterly review meeting last year. Instead of celebrating another record-breaking quarter, Damien seemed uncomfortable with the attention my team was receiving from industry publications and potential clients. Marketing Weekly had featured me in their Rising Stars Under 30 issue, and 3 competitors had approached me with job offers that would have doubled my salary. We need to be careful about individual team members getting too much external attention, Damien said during that meeting, his tone carrying a warning I didn't fully understand at the time. Rivers & Associates succeeds because we work as a unified team, not because of individual personalities. I should have recognized the shift in his attitude, the subtle undermining that would eventually escalate into outright sabotage. But I was focused on my work, on my clients, on building something excellent rather than playing office politics or managing family dynamics. That focus would eventually cost me everything I had worked to build. 6 months ago, I walked into Rivers & Associates on a Tuesday morning expecting another productive day of client meetings and strategic planning. I had just finished a presentation for Apex Financial that had exceeded every expectation, and I was excited about the expansion opportunities their account represented. Instead, I found myself sitting in Damien's office, listening to him explain why my 7 years of dedication, my track record of success, and my industry expertise were no longer sufficient to justify my position at the company that bore our family name. The conversation that followed would change everything. Not just about my career, but about my understanding of family loyalty, professional integrity, and what I was truly capable of achieving when I stopped trying to earn other people's approval and started building something entirely my own. But before I tell you about that devastating conversation and how it led to the most satisfying moment of professional revenge in corporate history, I need you to understand exactly what I was fighting for, what I lost, and why the stakes were so much higher than just a job or a paycheck. I was fighting for my identity, my future, and my right to be valued for what I could accomplish rather than dismissed for who I happened to be born related to. And when that fight was over, I would emerge as someone completely different, someone stronger, more confident, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who tried to underestimate her again. The story of how I ended up working for my brother begins 15 years ago, when I was a 14-year-old girl sitting in the back seat of our family's BMW, listening to my father explain why Rivers and Associates marketing would never be mine to inherit. "Marketing is a relationship business, sweetheart," Dad said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror as we drove home from Damien's high school graduation ceremony. "It requires a certain kind of natural authority that clients respond to. Damien has that presence, that commanding personality that makes people want to follow his lead." My mother nodded approvingly from the passenger seat. "Your brother was born to be a leader, Natalie. He's got your father's charisma and business instincts. You're more analytical. Maybe you could work in the business someday, help with the numbers or the research side of things." Even at 14, I understood the subtext. Damien was the heir apparent, destined to carry on the Rivers family legacy. I was the supporting character, valuable enough to be included but never central enough to matter. The company that bore our family name would pass from father to son, continuing a tradition that had nothing to do with capability and everything to do with gender and birth order. But something rebellious sparked in me that day. Maybe it was the casual dismissal in my parents' voices, or maybe it was watching Damien accept their praise with the smug satisfaction of someone who had never questioned his entitlement to success. Whatever it was, I made a silent promise to myself. I would prove them all wrong. Rivers and Associates had been founded by my grandfather, Theodore Rivers, in 1967 with nothing but a borrowed typewriter and a gift for understanding what made people want to buy things. He started in a cramped office above a hardware store in downtown Phoenix, creating advertising campaigns for local restaurants and car dealerships. By the time my father, Robert Rivers, took over in the early 90s, the company had grown into a respected regional agency with a reputation for creative campaigns and reliable results. Dad expanded the business significantly, adding digital services and attracting bigger clients throughout Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. Under his leadership, Rivers and Associates became known for its ability to blend traditional advertising wisdom with innovative marketing strategies that actually moved products off shelves. The company culture Dad created was intensely personal and relationship-driven. He knew every employee's name, remembered their kids' birthdays, and created the kind of workplace loyalty that made people turn down better offers to stay with the Rivers family. Clients weren't just accounts. They were partnerships built on trust, mutual respect, and consistently excellent results. This was the world I grew up observing from the periphery. While Damien spent summers working in various departments, learning the business from the ground up, with the expectation that he would eventually run everything, I was encouraged to focus on my studies and pursue more suitable interests like piano lessons and debate team. But I was always watching, always listening, always absorbing the conversations about client strategies and market positioning that happened around our dinner table. By the time I was 16, I could analyze a competitor's advertising campaign and identify its weaknesses with the same precision my father brought to client presentations. The turning point came during my junior year of high school when Rivers and Associates was struggling to develop an effective campaign for a local chain of fitness centers. The client was frustrated with the traditional approaches the team had presented, and Dad was uncharacteristically stressed about the possibility of losing the account.
They want something that speaks to younger demographics, he complained during dinner one evening. But every concept we've developed feels either too corporate or too gimmicky. We're missing something fundamental about what motivates people to join gyms. Without thinking, I spoke up. You're focusing on the wrong motivation. People don't join gyms because they want to exercise. They join because they want to become a different version of themselves. The campaign should sell transformation, not workouts. The table went quiet. Dad stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, genuine surprise, mixed with what might have been respect. That's actually a very sophisticated insight, he said slowly. How did you come to that conclusion? I explained my reasoning, drawing on psychology concepts I'd learned in AP classes, and observations about how successful brands created emotional connections with consumers. For the first time in my life, my parents listened to me as if I might have something valuable to contribute. The campaign that resulted from that conversation, Become Who You're Meant to Be, was one of the most successful in Rivers and Associates history. It not only saved the fitness center account, but attracted 3 new clients who had seen the billboards and wanted similar transformational messaging for their own brands. Dad never directly credited me for the breakthrough, but something changed in how he looked at me. During my senior year of high school, he started including me more in business conversations, asking for my perspective on industry trends and client challenges. When I announced my intention to major in business administration, he didn't try to steer me towards something more traditional for young women. Maybe you do have some of the Rivers instincts after all, he admitted one evening as we reviewed quarterly reports together in his home office. But understanding marketing and running a marketing company are 2 very different things. This business requires more than analytical intelligence. It requires leadership presence, the ability to inspire confidence in clients who are trusting you with millions of dollars of their budget. The implication was clear. I might be smart enough to contribute ideas, but I lacked whatever indefinable quality was necessary to actually lead. That quality apparently came naturally to Damien, who had spent 4 years at University of Southern California studying business and developing the kind of confident, outgoing personality that impressed clients and commanded respect in boardrooms. When I graduated from Arizona State and announced my intention to get an MBA, Dad was supportive but not enthusiastic. Advanced education is always valuable, he said diplomatically. Though I hope you're not planning to spend so much time in classrooms that you lose touch with practical business realities. Damien, who had joined Rivers and Associates immediately after college and was already being groomed for management responsibilities, was more direct in his skepticism. MBA programs are great for people who want to work at consulting firms or investment banks. But marketing is about creativity and intuition, not spreadsheets and case studies. You can't learn how to connect with people from a textbook.
His dismissive attitude stung, but it also motivated me to prove him wrong. I spent 2 years at Northwestern not just earning my MBA, but building a network of connections throughout the marketing and advertising industry. I interned at major agencies in Chicago, worked on campaigns for national brands, and developed expertise in digital marketing strategies that were just beginning to revolutionize the industry. When I returned to Phoenix with my MBA and 2 years of experience at top-tier firms, I had every intention of finding a position with one of Rivers and Associates' competitors. I wanted to prove my worth independently, to build my own reputation without the complications of family dynamics and preconceived notions about my capabilities. But Dad made me an offer that was too compelling to refuse. A senior position with significant autonomy, the opportunity to lead digital transformation initiatives, and what seemed like a clear path toward executive leadership. Most importantly, he positioned my return as essential to the company's future growth. The industry is changing faster than ever, he explained during the lunch where he officially recruited me. Companies that don't adapt to digital marketing will be obsolete within 5 years. We need someone who understands both traditional marketing principles and emerging technologies. That's you, Natalie.
You could be the bridge that takes Rivers and Associates into the next generation. It was everything I had dreamed of hearing from my father. Recognition of my unique value, acknowledgement of my expertise, an invitation to help shape the family business's future. When I accepted his offer, I genuinely believed I was coming home to claim my rightful place in the company I had loved from childhood. I had no idea that I was walking into a situation that would ultimately force me to choose between family loyalty and personal integrity, between the comfortable security of belonging and the uncertain freedom of building something entirely my own. Looking back now, I can see that Dad's offer was as much about keeping me close enough to control as it was about leveraging my talents. But at the time, walking into Rivers and Associates as Senior Vice President of Operations felt like the fulfillment of every ambition I had harbored since that day in the car, when I promised myself I would prove them all wrong. I thought I was finally getting the respect and recognition I had earned. Instead, I was setting myself up for the most devastating betrayal of my life. My first 3 years at Rivers and Associates felt like everything I had dreamed they would be. I threw myself into the work with the enthusiasm of someone who finally felt like she belonged, someone who was building something meaningful alongside people she loved and respected. The digital transformation initiatives I spearheaded weren't just successful, they were revolutionary for a company that had been slow to embrace social media marketing and influencer partnerships. Within 6 months of my return, I had restructured our entire approach to client onboarding, implementing data analytics systems that allowed us to track campaign performance in real time and adjust strategies based on actual consumer behavior rather than traditional demographic assumptions. The results were immediate and impressive. Client satisfaction scores increased by 23%, campaign ROI improved by an average of 67%, and we started attracting attention from national brands that had previously considered us too regional for their needs. Dad was thrilled with my contributions, frequently praising my strategic thinking during staff meetings and client presentations. Natalie has brought exactly the kind of fresh perspective we needed. She understands how to blend proven marketing principles with cutting-edge digital strategies, he would tell potential clients. Damien seemed equally supportive during those early years, often consulting with me on complex accounts and deferring to my expertise when clients asked technical questions about digital marketing metrics or social media engagement strategies. We developed what felt like a genuine partnership, with him handling the relationship management and creative vision, while I focused on strategy development and performance optimization. The family business felt like it was evolving into something bigger and more sophisticated than either of us could have built alone. Our complementary skills, his natural charisma and client relationship abilities, combined with my analytical expertise and digital marketing knowledge, created a powerful leadership team that attracted bigger clients and more complex projects than Rivers and Associates had ever handled. When Dad officially announced his intention to step back from daily operations and transition leadership responsibilities to the next generation, I felt like I was finally receiving the recognition I had worked toward my entire career. The transition plan he outlined positioned Damien as CEO, responsible for overall strategic direction and major client relationships, while I would serve as Chief Operating Officer, overseeing all internal operations, digital marketing initiatives, and performance analytics. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. Damien would be the public face of the company, handling the relationship building and vision casting that came naturally to him, while I managed the complex operational challenges that required my technical expertise and systematic approach to problem solving. We would be co-leaders in practice, if not in title, each contributing our unique strengths to continue building the family legacy.
But almost immediately after Dad's retirement became official, I began noticing subtle changes in how Damien interacted with me and discussed my role within the company. The collaborative consultations became less frequent, replaced by directives and predetermined decisions that I was expected to implement rather than help develop. Client meetings that had previously included both of us started happening without me, with Damien explaining afterward that he hadn't wanted to overwhelm clients with too many voices in strategic discussions. "We need to be more efficient with client time," he explained when I questioned why I hadn't been included in a major presentation to Westfield Corporation, one of our largest potential accounts. "Having both of us in every meeting can make decision-making feel cumbersome and unfocused." The explanation seemed reasonable on the surface, but
something about his tone felt different, more distant, more authoritative, less interested in my perspective than he had been when Dad was still actively involved in daily operations. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that the transition period was naturally causing some adjustments in how we worked together. The first real warning sign came during our quarterly staff meeting 6 months after Dad's retirement. Instead of presenting our performance metrics jointly, as we had been doing, Damien delivered the entire presentation himself, referencing my team's contributions only in passing and taking primary credit for strategic initiatives that had been developed collaboratively. The digital transformation of our client services has exceeded every expectation. Our new approach to data-driven campaign development has positioned Rivers and Associates as a leader in integrated marketing solutions. I sat in the back of the conference room, listening to him describe my work as if it had been his vision all along, feeling confused and slightly betrayed, but uncertain whether I should speak up or wait for a private conversation to clarify the misunderstanding. When I approached him afterward to discuss the presentation, his response was dismissive in a way that felt entirely new. "Obviously, we're a team, Nat," he said, using the childhood nickname that had always felt affectionate but now seemed condescending. "But clients and staff need to see clear leadership hierarchy. It's more professional when strategic communication comes from the CEO rather than being divided between multiple voices." The word professional hit me like a small slap. Was my communication style unprofessional? Had I been overstepping boundaries I didn't understand? I began second-guessing interactions that had previously felt natural and collaborative, wondering if Damien's new distance reflected legitimate concerns about my leadership approach or something else entirely. Over the following months, the pattern intensified. Strategic decisions that had previously been discussed and developed together were presented to me as finalized plans that needed immediate implementation. Client relationships I had carefully cultivated were gradually transferred to Damien's direct oversight, with explanations about streamlining communication and presenting a unified company voice. Most troubling was the way my team members began approaching me with questions and concerns about their job security and role clarity. Amanda Thornton, my creative director, was the first to voice what others were apparently thinking. "I'm getting mixed signals about our department's priorities," she said during one of our weekly one-on-one meetings. "Damien has been making suggestions about campaign directions that contradict the strategies we developed together. But when I ask for clarification, he says to check with you. Then when I check with you, you seem surprised by his suggestions." It was exactly the kind of confusion that destroys team morale and operational efficiency, and it was clearly deliberate. Damien was undermining my authority with my own team by creating competing directives and unclear reporting structures that made everyone uncertain about who was actually making decisions. When I confronted him about the communication breakdowns, his response revealed a side of my brother I had never seen before: cold, calculating, and completely comfortable with lying to my face. "I think you might be misunderstanding some casual conversations as formal directives," he said, his tone carrying the kind of patronizing patience usually reserved for children or employees who weren't quite bright enough to understand complex instructions. "We need to be more systematic about documenting strategic decisions, so there's less room for confusion." The explanation that I was confused or misunderstanding obvious information was so insulting that I almost couldn't process it. But what bothered me more was the realization that Damien was gaslighting me, systematically undermining my confidence and authority while positioning himself as the reasonable adult trying to manage my incompetence. That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing every interaction we had since Dad's retirement, looking for patterns and trying to understand when exactly my brother had decided that I was a problem to be managed rather than a partner to be respected.
The evidence was overwhelming once I forced myself to see it clearly. Damien had never intended to share leadership responsibilities with me. He had simply been more careful about concealing his true attitudes while Dad was still actively involved in daily operations. The collaborative partnership I thought we were building had been an illusion, a temporary arrangement that existed only as long as it served his purposes and our father's expectations. Now that he had complete control over the company's direction, he was systematically dismantling my influence and repositioning me as a senior employee rather than a co-leader. But I still believed that if I could just prove my value more clearly, if I could deliver results that were impossible to ignore or dismiss, Damien would remember why Dad had considered me essential to the company's future growth. I was still operating under the assumption that competence and results mattered more than politics and personal insecurities. I had no idea how wrong I was, or how much worse things were about to get. The coordinated campaign to diminish my role and authority at Rivers and Associates began in earnest during our fourth quarter performance review period. What I initially dismissed as isolated incidents and misunderstandings revealed itself to be a carefully orchestrated strategy designed to systematically undermine my credibility and position within the company. It started with the budget meetings. For 3 years, I had been responsible for developing departmental budgets and presenting resource allocation recommendations to the executive committee. My proposals were always meticulously researched, backed by performance data, and designed to maximize ROI on our marketing investments. Suddenly, Damien began questioning every line item, with the kind of aggressive scrutiny typically reserved for underperforming departments. "I'm seeing some concerning patterns in your spending priorities," he announced during what should have been a routine budget approval meeting. "The digital marketing tools and software subscriptions you're requesting seem excessive for a company our size. Are we sure these investments are generating returns that justify their costs?" The question was absurd on its face. My department consistently delivered the highest ROI in the company, and the digital tools he was questioning had been instrumental in landing our 3 largest clients. But Damien asked the question in front of the entire executive committee, creating an atmosphere where I had to defend obviously successful strategies as if they were experimental gambles. Our digital marketing initiatives generated $4.2 million in new revenue last quarter alone. The software investments he's questioning cost us $18,000 annually and directly contributed to campaign optimizations that increased client retention by 31%. Instead of acknowledging the clear success of my strategies, Damien shifted the conversation to question whether those results would be sustainable long-term and whether we were becoming too dependent on expensive technological solutions rather than fundamental marketing principles. "I'm not questioning the short-term results," he said, his tone suggesting patient concern rather than competitive undermining. "But I want to make sure we're building sustainable business practices that don't require constantly increasing investments in tools and platforms that may not be relevant 5 years from now." It was a masterful manipulation, framing my most successful initiatives as potentially risky, while positioning himself as the prudent leader thinking about long-term sustainability. The other executives nodded thoughtfully, as if his concerns were legitimate rather than transparently designed to make me appear reckless and short-sighted. The pattern repeated across every aspect of my work. Client presentations that had previously been delivered jointly became solo performances, where Damien presented strategies we had developed together, with my contributions relegated to technical implementation details. Strategic planning sessions that had once been collaborative brainstorming opportunities became meetings where Damien presented predetermined conclusions and asked for my input on execution logistics. Most insidiously, he began scheduling important client calls and meetings during times when he knew I had other commitments, then apologizing afterward for my absence while explaining to clients that operational demands sometimes prevented me from participating in strategic discussions. "Natalie is absolutely brilliant with the technical aspects of campaign development," he would tell clients when they asked where I was. "But I try to protect her time so she can focus on the detailed work that requires her expertise, rather than getting pulled into every high-level conversation."
The explanation sounded considerate and protective, but it had the effect of positioning me as a technical specialist rather than a strategic leader. Clients began directing their most important questions exclusively to Damien, treating me as someone who could implement his vision rather than someone capable of developing vision independently. Even more damaging was his new habit of questioning my decisions in front of my team. During staff meetings that had previously been collaborative planning sessions, Damien started making unexpected appearances to check in on our progress and offer additional perspective on projects we were developing. "I'm wondering if we might want to reconsider this approach," he would say after reviewing campaign concepts my team had spent weeks developing. "It feels a little aggressive for this particular client's brand identity. Natalie, what's your thinking on potentially softening the messaging to something more conservative?" The questions were always framed as collaborative input, but they had the effect of making my team doubt the strategic direction we had carefully researched and developed together. Team members began second-guessing decisions we had made collectively, asking whether they should run creative concepts by Damien before finalizing them, and seeking his approval for initiatives that had previously been within my complete authority.
Amanda Thornton finally confronted me directly about the increasingly dysfunctional dynamics. "I don't understand what's happening with the reporting structure," she said during a private conversation in my office. "Are we supposed to be getting approval from both you and Damien now? Because he's been suggesting changes to projects after you've already signed off on them, and it's creating confusion about who's actually making final decisions." I didn't have a good answer for her, because I was struggling to understand the situation myself. Damien's interventions always seemed reasonable when viewed individually. A CEO staying involved in major projects, offering additional perspective, ensuring quality control. But collectively, they created a pattern of undermining that made my leadership appear weak and indecisive. The most damaging incident occurred during our presentation to Meridian Industries, the Fortune 500 company that would eventually become both our biggest opportunity and my path to ultimate vindication. I had spent months developing a comprehensive digital marketing strategy for their product launch, working directly with their marketing director, Sarah Chen, to create a campaign that addressed their specific challenges with reaching younger demographics. The presentation was scheduled to be delivered jointly, with me handling the strategic overview and campaign details, while Damien managed relationship building and big picture vision. But 30 minutes before the meeting, Damien informed me that he had decided to handle the entire presentation himself. "I've been thinking about this," he said, reviewing my presentation materials with the casual authority of someone who had every right to make unilateral decisions. "Given the scope of this potential partnership, I think it's more appropriate for the CEO to present our strategic recommendations directly. You can jump in if they have specific technical questions about implementation." I stared at him, trying to process the casual way he was appropriating weeks of my work and reducing my role to that of a technical consultant. "Damien, this is my campaign strategy. I've been working with Sarah Chen for 3 months to develop these recommendations. She's expecting me to present the strategic framework we've been collaborating on." His response revealed the depth of his disrespect for my professional relationships and expertise. "Obviously, you've done excellent preparatory work," he said, his tone suggesting he was being generous by acknowledging my contribution. "But Meridian Industries is looking at a multi-million-dollar partnership. They need to see that Rivers and Associates has strong executive leadership driving strategic decisions." The implication was crystal clear. I was not strong executive leadership. I was preparatory work, technical implementation, excellent support for the real decision makers who commanded respect from major corporations. The presentation went exactly as I feared it would. Damien delivered my strategic recommendations with confidence and authority, taking credit for insights and innovations that had emerged from months of my direct collaboration with the client. When Sarah Chen asked detailed questions about campaign optimization and performance metrics, Damien turned to me for answers, positioning me as the technical specialist who could implement his strategic vision. Natalie has done tremendous analytical work on the demographic targeting strategies. She can walk you through the specific metrics and implementation details. I answered their questions professionally and thoroughly, but the dynamic was unmistakably clear. Damien was the strategic leader, and I was the technical specialist who translated his vision into actionable plans. By the end of the meeting, Sarah Chen was directing all her follow-up questions to Damien, treating me as a valuable but secondary resource. That night, I finally admitted to myself what had been obvious for months. My brother was systematically destroying my authority and credibility within our own company. This wasn't about operational efficiency or streamlined communication. This was about eliminating me as a rival for control of Rivers and Associates while keeping me around long enough to complete the work that generated revenue and client satisfaction. But I still believed that superior performance could overcome office politics, that results would ultimately speak louder than manipulation and power games. I had no idea that Damien was planning something far more drastic than gradual marginalization. I was about to discover just how far he was willing to go to secure his complete control over the company that bore our family name. The breaking point in my willingness to accept Damien's explanations came during what should have been a routine Thursday morning team meeting. I had called the session to review our Q1 performance metrics and plan our strategy for the upcoming Phoenix Business Summit, where Rivers and Associates would be presenting a case study on successful digital transformation in traditional marketing agencies. 20 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression of confusion and embarrassment that immediately put me on alert. "Natalie, I'm sorry to bother you, but there seems to be some confusion about this morning's meeting," Jessica said, holding a printed email that she clearly didn't want to deliver. "I just received this message from Damien's office saying that today's meeting has been moved to the executive conference room and will be led by him instead." I took the email from her hands, reading the brief message that had been sent to my entire team just minutes earlier. Due to scheduling conflicts, this morning's operational review will be conducted by CEO Damien Rivers in Conference Room A. Please bring Q1 performance materials and strategic planning documents for executive review.
The casual way he had taken over my meeting, redirected my team, and positioned himself as the person conducting their performance review felt like a physical blow. But what truly stunned me was the realization that he had planned this displacement in advance. The scheduling conflict he referenced didn't exist, and the request for strategic planning documents suggested he intended to review and potentially override decisions my team and I had made independently. Instead of confronting him directly, which would have given him another opportunity to gaslight me with reasonable-sounding explanations, I decided to observe. I positioned myself in the hallway outside Conference Room A, where I could hear the conversation without being detected. What I heard changed everything I thought I understood about my brother's motivations and methods. "I want to be clear about the reporting structure going forward," Damien's voice carried through the partially open door. "While Natalie has been managing day-to-day operations effectively, all strategic decisions and client communications need to flow through my office for final approval. We're entering a growth phase that requires more centralized leadership and consistent messaging." Amanda Thornton's voice was carefully neutral as she responded. "Should we continue to collaborate with Natalie on campaign development, or are you saying that strategic planning will be handled differently now?" "Natalie will continue to be involved in implementation and technical execution, but I need all client communications, budget decisions, and strategic initiatives cleared through me before they're finalized. This isn't about Natalie's capabilities, it's about ensuring we present a unified company vision to our clients and stakeholders." Jake Morrison, my data analytics specialist, asked the question I was dreading. What should we tell clients who have been working directly with Natalie on strategic planning? Some of them have specifically requested her involvement in upcoming projects. Damien's laugh was dismissive in a way that made my stomach clench. Clients sometimes think they want to work with specific team members, but what they really want is the best possible results for their campaigns.
We can deliver those results more effectively when strategic decisions are made at the executive level and implemented by our talented operational team. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Damien systematically redefining my role from strategic leader to operational manager, while making it sound like a natural evolution rather than a deliberate demotion. He spoke about my valuable contributions and essential technical expertise, while stripping away every aspect of my job that involved independent decision-making or client relationship management. But the most damaging part of the conversation was how he positioned this change to my team. Instead of acknowledging that he was undermining my authority, he framed the reorganization as a response to client feedback and company growth requirements that necessitated more executive oversight of strategic initiatives. "Has there been some kind of performance issue?" asked Amanda, her voice carrying genuine concern. "Because our metrics have been consistently strong and client satisfaction scores are at an all-time high." "Not at all," Damien assured her smoothly. "This is about scaling our operations for the next level of growth. As we take on larger clients and more complex projects, we need decision-making processes that can handle increased scope and responsibility." It was a masterful manipulation, taking credit for our team's success while using that success as justification for removing my authority over the work that had generated it. My team was being told that their excellent performance had earned them the privilege of more executive oversight, when in reality, their excellent performance was being used as evidence that I was no longer necessary as their leader. That afternoon, I made a decision that would prove crucial in the weeks to come. I started documenting everything. Every email exchange, every meeting agenda, every decision that was reversed or redirected without clear justification. I began keeping detailed records of client communications, budget approvals, and strategic recommendations that were attributed to Damien despite originating from my team's work. More importantly, I started researching the financial health of Rivers & Associates itself. My access to operational budgets and performance metrics gave me insight into aspects of the business that Damien assumed I wouldn't think to examine. What I discovered was troubling, in ways that went beyond office politics and sibling rivalry. Despite the revenue growth my department had generated, the company's cash flow was increasingly strained. Damien had been making significant investments in office expansion and equipment upgrades that seemed disproportionate to our actual growth trajectory. More concerning were consulting fees and strategic development expenses that appeared in monthly reports without clear explanations of what services were being provided or what outcomes were being achieved. When I cross-referenced these expenses with client acquisition data and revenue projections, a disturbing pattern emerged. Damien was spending money we didn't have on initiatives that weren't generating measurable returns, while simultaneously taking credit for the profitable work my team was producing. The company was essentially being subsidized by my department's success, while Damien pursued vanity projects and expansion plans that looked impressive but weren't financially sustainable.
The most revealing discovery came when I accessed our client retention analytics and compared them to Damien's reports to our board of advisors. According to his presentations, Rivers & Associates was experiencing unprecedented growth and client satisfaction across all departments. According to the actual data, we were retaining clients primarily because of ongoing relationships my team had built, while new client acquisition had actually declined by 23% over the past year. Damien was presenting my team's success as evidence of his leadership, while concealing the fact that his own strategic initiatives were failing to generate sustainable growth. He wasn't just taking credit for my work, he was covering up his own poor performance by redirecting attention to metrics that made him look successful. Armed with this information, I began to understand that my marginalization wasn't just about sibling rivalry or control issues. Damien needed to position himself as the sole architect of the company's success, because acknowledging my contributions would expose the reality that his own leadership initiatives were largely unsuccessful. But knowledge without a strategy is just frustration. I needed to decide how to use what I had learned, and whether there was any way to salvage my position at Rivers & Associates, or if the situation had deteriorated beyond repair. The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected, in a conversation that would force me to choose between family loyalty and professional integrity, between the comfortable fiction of collaborative leadership and the uncomfortable truth about what my brother was willing to do to maintain his control over our family's business. I was about to discover that everything I thought I knew about Damien's character and motivations was still just the surface of a much deeper and more calculating personality than I had ever imagined possible. The discovery that shattered every remaining illusion about my brother's character came through a mistake he never intended to make. It was a Friday evening in late January, and I had stayed late to finish preparing client reports for Monday morning meetings. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew, and I was working in the quiet efficiency that comes from having the entire space to yourself. I had walked to the break room to refill my coffee when I noticed that Damien's office door was slightly ajar with his computer still glowing in the darkened room. He had apparently left in a hurry after his final meeting of the day, forgetting to log out of his system, something that never happened given his usual obsession with security and privacy. My first instinct was to simply close his door and return to my own work. But as I approached his office, I could see email notifications flashing on his screen, and one sender name caught my attention: Harrison Vale, the CEO of Meridian Industries. The subject line was visible from the doorway: Confidential discussion, Natalie Rivers concerns. The ethical voice in my head told me to walk away, to respect his privacy and address any concerns through proper channels. But the professional survival instinct that had been growing stronger over the past months overruled my ethical hesitations. If Meridian Industries had concerns about me that were being discussed behind my back, I needed to know what those concerns were and how they might affect my career and reputation. I stepped into Damien's office and read the email thread that would change everything I thought I understood about my situation at Rivers & Associates. The most recent message, sent just an hour earlier, was from Harrison Vale. Damien, after our conversation this afternoon, I wanted to follow up on the concerns you raised about your sister's role in our upcoming campaigns. You mentioned that she's been experiencing some personal issues that are affecting her professional judgment. Can you provide more specifics about what we should be watching for? I scrolled down to read Damien's response, feeling my heart rate accelerate as the scope of his betrayal became clear. Harrison, I appreciate your discretion in handling this situation. Natalie has been struggling with some personal stability issues that have started affecting her work quality and client relationships. She's become increasingly defensive about feedback and territorial about projects, which is creating tension within our team dynamic. The message continued with details that were not just false, but strategically crafted to undermine my credibility. I've been trying to provide additional oversight and support, but she's interpreting management guidance as personal criticism. I'm concerned that her emotional instability might affect her interactions with your team, particularly given the high-stakes nature of your product launch campaign. But it was the next paragraph that revealed the true depth of his calculated manipulation. I want to be transparent with you about this because Meridian Industries deserves the highest level of professional service. While Natalie has valuable technical skills, I believe it would be better for me to serve as your primary strategic contact going forward. This would ensure more consistent communication and eliminate any potential issues with her current situation. I stared at the screen, reading the words multiple times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding their meaning. My brother had contacted our most important client to spread false rumors about my mental health and professional competence. He was using invented concerns about my personal stability and emotional instability to justify removing me from the account while positioning himself as the responsible leader protecting the client from my alleged problems.
The email thread continued with Harrison's responses, which showed that Damien's strategy was working exactly as intended. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We certainly want to maintain the strongest possible working relationship with Rivers & Associates. If you think it's best for you to handle our strategic communications directly, I'm comfortable with that arrangement. But the most damaging discovery was yet to come. As I scrolled through more of Damien's sent messages, I found similar email threads with 3 other major clients. In each case, he had initiated confidential conversations about my supposed personal and professional problems, using slightly different details but the same basic strategy.
position me as unstable and unreliable, while presenting himself as the mature, responsible leader managing a difficult situation. To clients at Apex Financial Services, he had described me as going through a difficult transition period that was affecting my decision-making abilities. To the marketing director at Southwestern Healthcare, he had expressed concerns about my recent aggressive approach to client relations and suggested that direct communication through him would be more productive. To Phoenix Technology Solutions, he had mentioned my increasing resistance to collaborative feedback as a reason for restructuring our account management approach. Each message was carefully crafted to sound like a concerned brother and responsible CEO trying to manage a delicate situation while protecting both the client relationship and my reputation. But the most damaging discovery was a draft email in his outbox that hadn't been sent yet. It was addressed to Sarah Chen, the marketing director at Meridian Industries, who had worked directly with me on campaign development and had specifically requested my continued involvement in their strategic planning. The draft read, "Sarah, I wanted to reach out privately because I value our working relationship and want to ensure you have the context you need for upcoming project decisions. As I mentioned to Harrison, Natalie has been experiencing some personal challenges that are affecting her professional performance. I've noticed increasing inconsistencies in her strategic recommendations and some concerning patterns in her client communications." The message went on to suggest that Sarah should direct all future strategic questions to him rather than me, framing this change as a temporary measure to ensure project quality while I worked through my current difficulties. But the final paragraph revealed something even more sinister than character assassination. "I want to assure you that Rivers & Associates remains fully committed to delivering exceptional results for Meridian Industries. In fact, I believe this transition in project leadership will actually improve our strategic focus and campaign development efficiency." Damien wasn't just destroying my reputation, he was using that destruction to convince clients that my removal from their accounts would benefit them. He was turning my alleged instability into a selling point for his own leadership, making clients feel like they were receiving upgraded service by working with him instead of me. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. For months, while I had been documenting his office politics and power games, he had been conducting a systematic character assassination campaign with our most important clients. He had been systematically poisoning professional relationships I had spent years building, using false concerns about my mental health as justification for excluding me from the strategic work that had been my primary responsibility. But the most chilling discovery was a folder labeled Transition Planning that contained detailed documents outlining his strategy for completely removing me from client-facing responsibilities. The documents included timelines for transferring my accounts to his direct oversight, talking points for explaining my reduced role to clients and staff members, and even draft job descriptions for a new Director of Operations position that would replace my current role with someone who reported directly to him. The plan was comprehensive and methodical, designed to eliminate me as a strategic leader while keeping me as an operational manager with no client relationships, no independent authority, and no ability to build the kind of professional reputation that might allow me to leave Rivers & Associates for a better position elsewhere. As I sat in Damien's office, reading through months of calculated betrayal and strategic manipulation, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The last remnants of family loyalty and hope for reconciliation died, replaced by a cold clarity about what I was dealing with and what I needed to do to protect myself. My brother wasn't just a competitive sibling or an insecure leader. He was someone capable of destroying another person's career through systematic lies and character assassination. He had weaponized mental health stigma, manipulated client relationships I had spent years building, and created a comprehensive plan to trap me in a diminished role while taking credit for everything I had accomplished. But he had also made a critical mistake by documenting his entire strategy in writing. Every false claim,
Every manipulative message, every calculated betrayal was preserved in his email records, providing me with evidence of a pattern of professional sabotage that went beyond office politics.
For the first time in months, I felt like I had some power in this situation. Damien had been operating under the assumption that I was naive enough to accept his explanations and passive enough to tolerate his manipulations indefinitely. He had no idea that I was now fully aware of his tactics and in possession of documentation that could expose everything he had been doing. The question was no longer whether I could salvage my position at Rivers and Associates. The damage to my reputation and relationships was probably irreversible. The question was how to use what I had learned to protect myself from further harm and ensure that Damien faced consequences for his actions. I was about to become a very different kind of opponent than he had prepared for. The weekend following my discovery of Damien's email campaign was the most intense 48 hours of strategic planning I had ever undertaken. I spent Saturday morning in my apartment, surrounded by printed emails, financial documents, and performance reports, mapping out the full scope of his deception and calculating the damage he had inflicted on my professional reputation. But more importantly, I was planning my response. My first priority was preserving evidence. I used my administrative access to the company's shared systems to create comprehensive backups of every email thread, financial report, and performance metric that documented both my actual contributions and Damien's systematic efforts to undermine them. I copied client communications that showed my direct involvement in strategic planning, before Damien had begun excluding me from those relationships. I also documented the timeline of his character assassination campaign, cross-referencing his false claims to clients with the actual dates of our successful project completions and positive client feedback. The contrast was damning. He had been telling clients I was unstable and unreliable during the exact same periods when those clients were praising my strategic insights and campaign results. But evidence alone wouldn't be sufficient to protect me from the damage he had already caused. I needed to understand exactly how far his influence had spread, and whether there were any professional relationships I could still salvage or leverage. That's when I made the decision to reach out directly to Sarah Chen at Meridian Industries. Sarah and I had developed a genuine working relationship over the months we had collaborated on their digital marketing strategy. She was intelligent, direct, and seemed to value competence over office politics. If anyone would be willing to listen to my side of the story and evaluate my work based on actual results rather than Damien's false characterizations, it would be her. I crafted a carefully worded email requesting a private conversation about our upcoming project timeline. I didn't mention anything about family dynamics or internal company issues. I simply suggested that there might be some miscommunications affecting our strategic planning process that could be resolved through direct dialogue. Her response came within 2 hours. "Natalie, I'd be happy to discuss the project timeline. Actually, I've been hoping to get some clarification about recent changes in communication protocols. Could we meet for coffee Monday morning before our scheduled team meeting?" The speed and tone of her response told me that she had indeed noticed the changes in how Rivers and Associates was managing her account, and that she might have questions about those changes that Damien hadn't anticipated. Sunday evening, I made the most difficult decision of my professional life. I began quietly reaching out to recruiters and industry contacts about opportunities outside of Rivers and Associates, not because I was ready to leave immediately, but because I needed to understand what options existed if the situation became untenable. The responses were both encouraging and sobering. My reputation in the Phoenix marketing community was stronger than I had realized. Several agencies had been watching my work and would be interested in discussing senior-level positions if I ever decided to make a change. But the conversations also revealed that rumors were already circulating about instability at Rivers and Associates, suggesting that Damien's character assassination campaign was having its intended effect on my broader professional reputation. Marcus Webb, a senior partner at Phoenix Creative Group, was particularly direct during our phone conversation. "Natalie, I'll be honest with you. There have been some unusual inquiries about your work recently. Nothing specific, just questions about your availability and whether you might be looking for new opportunities. It felt like someone was testing the waters to see if you were job hunting." The implication was clear. Damien wasn't just undermining my relationships with current clients, he was preemptively sabotaging potential opportunities with other agencies. He was trying to trap me at Rivers and Associates by making it impossible for me to find comparable positions elsewhere. But Marcus's call also revealed something Damien couldn't have anticipated. His inquiries had actually increased interest in my work rather than diminishing it.
Several agency leaders interpreted the mysterious questions about my availability as evidence that I was being recruited aggressively, which made them more curious about my capabilities rather than less confident in them. If you ever decide you want to have a conversation about opportunities, we'd be very interested in discussing how your digital marketing expertise might fit with our client base. Your work on the Southwestern Bank rebrand was brilliant, exactly the kind of strategic thinking we look for in senior hires.
By Monday morning, I had developed a 3-phase strategy for protecting myself and potentially turning the situation to my advantage. Phase 1 involved gathering additional evidence and confirming my suspicions about client reactions. Phase 2 would focus on securing my professional reputation and exploring alternative opportunities. Phase 3 remained flexible, depending on what I learned during the first 2 phases and how aggressively Damien escalated his campaign against me. My coffee meeting with Sarah Chen exceeded every expectation I had harbored about her willingness to engage with the reality of the situation. She arrived at the small cafe near Meridian Industries headquarters with the focused attention of someone who had been thinking carefully about our conversation and had specific questions she wanted answered. Natalie, I'm going to be direct with you because I respect your work and I value honest communication, she began after we had ordered our drinks. There's been some confusion about project management and communication protocols for our upcoming campaign. Damien has suggested that you're experiencing some personal challenges that might affect your involvement in strategic planning, but frankly, that doesn't align with my experience working with you. Her directness was both a relief and a validation. She had noticed the inconsistencies between Damien's characterizations and my actual performance, and she was professional enough to seek clarification rather than simply accepting his version of events. I appreciate you bringing this up directly, I replied, choosing my words carefully. There have been some internal changes in how we're managing client communications, but I want to assure you that my commitment to delivering excellent results for Meridian Industries hasn't changed at all. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression suggesting she understood there were underlying issues I couldn't discuss openly. The strategic framework you developed for our product launch was exactly what we needed. Your understanding of our target demographics and digital marketing challenges has been exceptional. If there are internal management changes affecting our project, I need to understand how that might impact the quality and consistency of the work we've been developing together. It was the opening I needed to address the situation without violating professional boundaries or making accusations I couldn't prove. I think the most important thing is ensuring that the strategic direction we've developed together remains consistent and that you continue to have direct access to the team members who understand your specific requirements best. Her smile was knowing rather than surprised. Exactly, which is why I wanted to have this conversation with you directly rather than relying on secondhand explanations about project management changes. We spent the next 45 minutes discussing campaign details and timeline expectations, but the subtext was clear. Sarah valued my strategic input and wasn't convinced by Damien's attempts to marginalize my involvement in her account. More importantly, she was willing to advocate for maintaining our working relationship despite pressure from Rivers and Associates executive level to redirect communication through different channels. I'll be honest with you, Natalie. Meridian Industries has been very happy with the collaborative approach we've developed. If internal changes at Rivers and Associates start affecting the quality or consistency of our strategic planning, we'll need to reevaluate our partnership expectations. The implication was unmistakable. If Rivers and Associates couldn't provide her with direct access to the team members she preferred working with, Meridian Industries might reconsider their contract entirely. Sarah was essentially giving me leverage to use against Damien's attempts to exclude me from her account. But more than leverage, her response confirmed something crucial about my situation. My professional reputation with clients was based on actual performance and results, not on office politics or family dynamics. If I could find a way to separate my work from Rivers and Associates' internal dysfunction, I might be able to preserve and even expand the client relationships that represented my true professional value. That afternoon, I made a decision that would prove to be the turning point in my entire career. I started researching what it would take to establish my own consulting firm with the specific goal of serving clients who valued strategic expertise over corporate politics. The idea terrified me, but it also excited me in a way I hadn't felt since joining Rivers and Associates 7 years ago. For the first time since Damien had begun his campaign against me, I was thinking like an entrepreneur rather than a victim, planning offensive strategies rather than defensive reactions. I was about to discover just how much power I actually possessed when I stopped trying to fight for my place in someone else's company and started building something entirely my own. The confrontation that would change everything happened on a Tuesday morning in February during what was supposed to be a routine executive team meeting. I had spent the previous week carefully preparing for this moment, knowing that Damien's escalating attempts to marginalize me would eventually force a direct conflict that would determine the future of my career at Rivers and Associates. I arrived at the conference room 15 minutes early, positioning myself strategically at the table with my laptop open and my documentation readily accessible. When Damien entered with his usual confident stride, carrying a folder that I suspected contained his latest attempt to justify my removal from key accounts, I was ready for whatever accusations or manipulations he had prepared.
What I wasn't prepared for was the presence of our company's board of advisors. I've asked Richard Steinberg and Patricia Walsh to join us this morning, Damien announced, as our two most senior board members took seats at the conference table. We need to discuss some personnel and operational changes that require board oversight. Richard and Patricia had been advising Rivers and Associates since Dad's retirement, providing strategic guidance and fiduciary oversight for major business decisions. Their presence transformed what I had expected to be a private family confrontation into a formal corporate proceeding with potential legal and financial implications. As you know, Damien continued, distributing copies of a presentation I had never seen before, we've been experiencing some challenges with client communication and project management consistency. After careful review, I believe we need to restructure our operational hierarchy to ensure better quality control and strategic alignment. I opened the presentation packet, feeling my heart rate accelerate as I read the title page, Organizational Restructuring Proposal, Optimizing Leadership Efficiency and Client Service Excellence. The subtitle made his intentions crystal clear, Proposed Transition of Senior VP Operations to Director of Technical Implementation. The proposal was a masterpiece of corporate manipulation, written in professional language that disguised a character assassination as a business strategy. Damien had documented every incident of communication breakdown and strategic misalignment that had occurred over the past 6 months, incidents that I now understood he had deliberately created, and presented them as evidence that my current role was too broad for my capabilities. As page 3 outlines, specific examples of coordination challenges we've encountered, Damien said, his tone carrying the practiced authority of someone delivering an objective business analysis. Multiple clients have expressed concerns about inconsistent messaging and unclear decision-making protocols. I flipped to page 3, reading quotes from client communications that had been carefully edited to remove context and create false impressions. A comment from Harrison Vale about wanting clear communication protocols was presented without mentioning that his request had been prompted by Damien's interference in our established project management system. Sarah Chen's question about recent changes in account management was quoted without including her positive feedback about our collaborative strategic planning process. But the most damaging section was page 5, which contained what Damien described as confidential client feedback about my professional performance. Without identifying specific sources, he had compiled a series of concerns about my defensive communication style, resistance to collaborative input, and inconsistent strategic recommendations. Every quote was either taken out of context, completely fabricated, or based on interactions that had been deliberately sabotaged by his interventions. But presented in a formal business document to board members who hadn't witnessed the actual events, the quotes created a compelling narrative of declining performance and professional incompetence. The solution I'm proposing, Damien continued, moving to page 7, is to restructure Natalie's role to focus on her core strengths in technical implementation and data analysis, while centralizing strategic planning and client communications under direct executive oversight.
Richard Steinberg, who had known our family for over a decade, looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Damien, these are serious allegations about your sister's performance. Have you discussed these concerns with her directly? Has she been given opportunities to address the issues you've identified? It was exactly the question I had been hoping someone would ask, because it gave me the opening I needed to present the evidence I had been carefully preparing. Actually, I said, opening my laptop and connecting it to the conference room projector, I think there might be some misunderstandings about the source of our client communication challenges. I've prepared some documentation that might provide additional context for these concerns. Damien's face went pale as he realized I was about to present my own evidence, but he couldn't object without appearing to suppress relevant information in front of the board members. My presentation was titled Analysis of Client Relationship Management, Documentation of Communication Patterns and Performance Metrics. I had spent days crafting slides that told the story of Damien's systematic sabotage without making direct accusations, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Slide 2 shows our client retention and satisfaction metrics over the past 18 months. I began, displaying charts that demonstrated consistently excellent performance across all accounts under my direct management. As you can see, retention rates have remained above 94%, and client satisfaction scores have actually improved during the period that Damien has identified as problematic. Patricia Walsh leaned forward, studying the data with the analytical attention of someone who understood the significance of those metrics. These numbers are excellent, Natalie. How do you reconcile this performance data with the client concerns that Damien has documented? That's exactly what I wanted to address, I replied, advancing to slide 3. I think there may be some confusion about the timeline and source of client communications. What followed was the most professionally satisfying presentation I had ever delivered. Using time-stamped emails, client feedback records, and communication logs, I demonstrated that every instance of client confusion or concern that Damien had attributed to my performance had actually occurred immediately after his unsolicited interventions in established project management processes. For example, I displayed an email thread from the Meridian Industries account. Harrison Vale's request for clear communication protocols was sent on January 15th, the day after a previously scheduled client meeting was unexpectedly moved to accommodate Damien's availability, creating confusion about project timeline and deliverables.
I methodically worked through each example in Damien's presentation, providing context that revealed a pattern of interference and manipulation rather than incompetence and poor performance. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. I think it's also important to understand how client perceptions might have been influenced by internal communications, I said, advancing to a slide that contained screenshots of Damien's email campaign. I've discovered some concerning discrepancies between our actual client interactions and the way those interactions have been characterized in internal communications. The silence in the conference room was deafening as board members read Damien's emails to Harrison Vale, complete with his false claims about my personal stability issues and emotional instability affecting client relationships. Richard Steinberg's voice was careful and controlled when he finally spoke. Damien, did you send these emails to our clients without consulting the board or documenting these alleged performance issues through proper channels? I watched my brother's confident facade crumble as he realized that his entire strategy had been exposed. His face cycled through expressions of shock, anger, and desperation as he tried to formulate a response that could somehow justify his actions. I was trying to protect our client relationships, he said finally, his voice lacking its usual authority. When I noticed these performance issues, I felt it was important to proactively address client concerns before they became larger problems. Patricia's response was swift and devastating. Damien, contacting clients to discuss alleged employee performance issues without documentation, board oversight, or HR consultation is a serious breach of corporate governance protocols. Making false statements about an employee's mental health to external parties could expose the company to significant legal liability. But I wasn't finished.
I had saved the most damaging evidence for last. "There's one more thing the board should be aware of," I said, advancing to my final slide. "I've also discovered evidence that these client communications may have been part of a broader pattern of financial mismanagement and strategic misrepresentation." The slide displayed a comparison between Damien's board reports and the actual financial performance data I had compiled. The discrepancies were stark and undeniable. He had been inflating revenue projections, concealing cost overruns, and attributing my department's success to company-wide strategic initiatives that didn't exist. "The financial metrics Damien has been reporting to the board don't match our actual performance data," I explained. "Revenue growth has been concentrated in accounts under my direct management, while new client acquisition and company-wide strategic initiatives have actually declined significantly." As the full scope of Damien's deception became clear, I watched the board members exchange meaningful glances that told me everything I needed to know about how this confrontation would end. Richard finally broke the silence. "Damien, I think we need to suspend this meeting and schedule emergency board discussions about these allegations. The issues Natalie has raised require immediate investigation and legal review." But before anyone could respond, Damien made the mistake that would seal his fate and open the door to my ultimate vindication. "This is ridiculous," he exploded, his composure finally shattering completely. "Natalie has been undermining my authority for months, questioning my decisions and going behind my back to clients. She's not qualified to run strategic accounts, and everyone knows it. The only reason she's gotten this far is because Dad felt guilty about not including her in succession planning." The words hung in the air like a confession, revealing the depth of his resentment and the real motivation behind his systematic campaign against me. In 30 seconds of uncontrolled anger, he had confirmed everything I had been documenting about his character and motivations. "I think this meeting is over," Patricia said quietly. "Damien, you need to retain legal counsel immediately. Natalie, please document everything you've presented today and provide copies to our corporate attorney." As the board members filed out of the conference room, I remained seated at the table, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I had won the battle, but the war had cost me my family and my place in the company I had worked so hard to build. But I was about to discover that sometimes winning one battle opens doors to opportunities you never imagined possible. The 48 hours following the board meeting were unlike anything I had ever experienced in my professional life. Within hours of our confrontation, word had spread throughout Rivers and Associates that something significant had happened at the executive level. By Thursday morning, I found myself in the unprecedented position of being the most informed person in the company about its immediate future, while Damien was conspicuously absent from the office. The first indication of how dramatically the power dynamics had shifted came when Patricia Walsh called me directly at 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning. "Natalie, the board met an emergency session last night, and we need to discuss some immediate operational changes," she said, her tone carrying the kind of urgent professionalism that indicated major corporate decisions were being made rapidly. "Can you come in early to meet with Richard and I before the office opens?" When I arrived at the conference room at 7:30 a.m., I found both board members waiting with coffee, legal documents, and expressions that mixed concern with determination. They had clearly spent considerable time reviewing the evidence I had presented and consulting with the company's attorneys about the legal and financial implications of Damien's actions.
"First, I want you to know that the board takes your allegations very seriously," Richard began, consulting notes that suggested extensive preparation. "Our legal counsel has reviewed the documentation you provided, and there are significant concerns about potential liability exposure from Damien's communications with clients." Patricia leaned forward, her expression grave. "The false statements about your mental health, combined with the financial misrepresentations to the board, constitute serious breaches of fiduciary duty and corporate governance. We've placed Damien on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation." I felt a complex mixture of vindication and shock.
While I had hoped my evidence would be taken seriously, I hadn't expected the board to act so quickly or decisively against someone who was both the CEO and a family member. What does that mean for day-to-day operations? I asked, trying to process the immediate practical implications of Damien's suspension. That's exactly what we need to discuss with you, Richard replied, sliding a document across the table. We need someone to serve as interim CEO while we conduct our investigation and determine long-term leadership arrangements. Given your operational knowledge and client relationships, the board would like you to consider accepting that position. I stared at the formal appointment letter, reading the title Interim Chief Executive Officer beneath my name, and feeling like I was looking at someone else's career rather than my own. 3 days earlier, Damien had been trying to demote me to a technical implementation role. Now the board was asking me to run the entire company. I'm honored by your confidence, I said carefully, but I want to make sure we address the elephant in the room. Damien is my brother, and this situation involves family dynamics that could complicate my ability to lead effectively. Patricia's response revealed that the board had considered this concern extensively. Actually, we believe your family relationship makes you the ideal person to manage this transition. You understand the company culture and client relationships better than any outside CEO we could bring in temporarily. More importantly, your handling of this situation has demonstrated exactly the kind of ethical leadership and strategic thinking we need during a crisis. The irony was profound. Damien's systematic attempts to undermine my authority had, instead, provided me with opportunities to demonstrate leadership capabilities that impressed the board more than years of conventional executive performance might have accomplished. But accepting the interim CEO position was only the beginning of the power reversal that would unfold over the following weeks. As I began reviewing the company's financial situation with full executive access, I discovered that Damien's problems went far beyond the client communication issues and board misrepresentations I had already exposed. The consulting fees and strategic development expenses I had questioned months earlier were revealed to be payments to a business development firm owned by Damien's college roommate, providing services that had generated no measurable results and questionable value. The office expansion and equipment upgrades he had championed were financed through credit arrangements that put the company's assets at risk without board approval. Most damaging was the discovery that he had been using company resources to explore acquisition opportunities and expansion plans that were far beyond Rivers & Associates' financial capacity, apparently hoping to create a growth trajectory that would justify his inflated performance reports to the board. The financial situation is more precarious than anyone realized, I explained to Patricia and Richard during our Friday morning strategy session. Richard's expression was grim as he reviewed the financial analysis I had prepared. How serious is the cash flow situation? We have approximately 60 days of operating capital at current expense levels. If we can't renegotiate some of these commitments or generate significant new revenue quickly, we'll be facing insolvency issues by the end of the quarter. But financial crisis also created opportunity for decisive leadership. With board authorization and legal backing, I began immediately implementing emergency cost control measures and client retention strategies that would stabilize our short-term situation while building towards sustainable growth. The most crucial challenge was managing client relationships that had been damaged by Damien's interference and misrepresentations. I spent the weekend calling every major client personally, explaining that there had been leadership changes at Rivers & Associates and that I would be serving as their primary point of contact going forward. The conversations were more positive than I had dared to hope. Harrison Vale at Meridian Industries was actually relieved to hear about the changes. Frankly, Natalie, there were some communication issues developing that were starting to concern us about Rivers & Associates' stability, he admitted during our Monday morning call. Having you as our primary contact eliminates those concerns completely. Your strategic insights have been exactly what we needed for our expansion plans. Sarah Chen was even more direct in her response. This is the best news I've heard in months. The mixed messaging and unclear decision-making protocols were becoming a real problem for our campaign timeline. Can we schedule a meeting this week to discuss accelerating some of our strategic initiatives now that communication channels are clearer?
But the most satisfying conversation was with Marcus Webb at Penix Creative Group, who had been monitoring industry developments and heard rumors about leadership changes at Rivers and Associates.
Natalie, I have to say I'm impressed by how quickly you've moved to address the situation, he said during our call. The marketing community was starting to wonder about Rivers and Associates' direction, but having you step into leadership eliminates those concerns completely. He paused before adding something that would prove prophetic. Actually, this might be exactly the kind of disruption that positions Rivers and Associates for significant growth. You've got the client relationships, the strategic expertise, and now the executive authority to build something really impressive. Within 2 weeks of accepting the interim CEO position, I had stabilized our cash flow situation, restored confidence with our major clients, and begun implementing operational efficiencies that Damien's ego-driven expansion plans had made impossible. But the most significant development came when I received an unexpected call from Harrison Vale with a proposition that would change everything about my career trajectory and the future of Rivers and Associates. Natalie, Meridian Industries has been evaluating our marketing partnerships across all our divisions, he said during our Thursday afternoon call. Based on the excellent work you've been doing for our Phoenix operations, we'd like to discuss expanding our relationships significantly. He went on to outline an opportunity that dwarfed anything Rivers and Associates had ever been offered, a comprehensive marketing partnership that would handle brand development, digital marketing, and strategic communications for all of Meridian Industries' southwestern operations, with a total contract value exceeding $12 million annually. The contract would require expanding your operational capacity considerably, Harrison continued. We'd need assurance that Rivers and Associates has the leadership stability and strategic vision to handle this level of responsibility. It was the opportunity every marketing agency dreams of, the kind of transformational contract that would establish us as a major regional player and provide the financial foundation for sustainable growth. But it was also a contract that Damien never could have secured, both because his interference had damaged our client relationships and because he lacked the strategic vision and operational expertise necessary to manage such a complex engagement. I'm very interested in discussing this opportunity, I replied, feeling the pieces of a much larger plan beginning to align in my mind. Let me prepare some preliminary thoughts about operational scaling and timeline requirements, and we can schedule a comprehensive planning session next week. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Damien's systematic attempts to diminish my role and authority had actually created the perfect conditions for me to demonstrate capabilities that far exceeded anything he had ever accomplished as CEO. The power reversal was complete. But the real transformation was just beginning. The 3 months following my appointment as interim CEO were the most transformative period of my professional life. What began as crisis management evolved into strategic rebuilding as I systematically addressed the operational challenges Damien had created while simultaneously positioning Rivers and Associates for unprecedented growth. The first major decision I made was restructuring our entire organizational hierarchy to eliminate the dysfunctional communication patterns that had plagued the company under Damien's leadership. Instead of the centralized, ego-driven model he had implemented, I created collaborative teams with clear accountability and direct client communication channels. Amanda Thornton, who had watched the leadership transition with keen interest, became my first strategic hire as Director of Creative Strategy. During our planning session for the new structure, she was remarkably direct about the impact of the recent changes. Natalie, I have to tell you that the last 6 months under Damien's management were the most frustrating of my career. The constant mixed messaging and arbitrary decision changes were destroying team morale and client relationships. Having clear leadership and consistent communication has already improved our productivity by at least 40%.
Jake Morrison echoed her sentiments when I promoted him to Director of Analytics and Performance Optimization. He told me during our transition meeting, "The data supports what Amanda is saying. Client satisfaction scores have increased by 23% since you took over as CEO, and project completion timelines have improved dramatically without the constant revisions and second guessing we were dealing with before." But the most significant change was cultural rather than operational. For the first time in years, Rivers and Associates felt like a company where competence was valued over politics, where strategic thinking was encouraged rather than suppressed, and where team members could focus on delivering excellent work rather than navigating interpersonal conflicts and unclear authority structures. The Meridian Industries contract negotiations provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate our new capabilities. Harrison Vale and his team were impressed not just with our strategic recommendations, but with our organizational efficiency and collaborative approach to complex project management. "This is exactly the kind of partnership we were hoping to develop," Harrison said during our final contract meeting. "Your team's ability to integrate strategic thinking with operational excellence gives us confidence that this expansion will deliver the results we need." The $12 million annual contract was officially signed on a Friday afternoon in May in a conference room filled with Meridian Industries executives, Rivers and Associates team members, and board representatives who had watched our company transform from potential bankruptcy to major market player in less than 4 months.
But even more satisfying than the financial security was the moment when Harrison asked me to consider an opportunity that would take my career in a direction I had never imagined. "Natalie, Meridian Industries has been evaluating strategic acquisitions in the marketing and communications sector," he said as we concluded our signing ceremony. "We're looking for opportunities to develop integrated service capabilities that would complement our core business operations." He paused, studying my reaction before continuing with a proposition that would change everything about my future. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of Rivers and Associates becoming a subsidiary of Meridian Industries, with you serving as CEO of our new marketing and strategic communications division." The offer was structured as both acquisition and opportunity. Meridian would purchase Rivers and Associates for significantly more than its current market value, while I would gain access to resources and client relationships that could expand our capabilities exponentially. More importantly, the position would give me executive authority over marketing strategy for one of the Southwest's largest corporations. "The division would operate with considerable autonomy," Harrison explained, "but you'd have access to Meridian Industries' resources, client base, and strategic partnerships. We think your expertise could help us develop marketing capabilities that would benefit all our subsidiary companies." It was the kind of opportunity that typically required decades of corporate ladder climbing to achieve. The chance to build and lead a major corporate division with virtually unlimited resources and growth potential. But it was also an opportunity that existed only because of the crisis Damien had created and my response to that crisis. During the weekend following Harrison's offer, I found myself reflecting on the strange trajectory that had brought me to this moment. 6 months earlier, I'd been fighting to maintain my position as senior vice president at a struggling family business. Now I was being recruited to serve as CEO of a corporate division that would give me more authority and resources than Damien had ever possessed. The board meeting where I presented Harrison's offer was unlike any corporate discussion I had ever participated in. Richard Steinberg and Patricia Walsh had spent the previous week consulting with legal and financial advisors about the implications of the acquisition. But their questions revealed genuine excitement about the opportunity rather than concern about potential risks. "The financial terms are significantly better than we could have expected 6 months ago," Richard admitted, reviewing the acquisition details. "But more importantly, this partnership positions Rivers and Associates for growth that would have been impossible as an independent agency." Patricia was equally enthusiastic about the strategic implications. "Natalie, your leadership during this transition has been extraordinary. The board is completely confident in your ability to manage this expansion and represent our company's interests within Meridian Industries' corporate structure." But the conversation that meant the most to me was the private meeting I had with my father the weekend before I accepted Harrison's offer. Dad had remained largely absent from the crisis surrounding Damien's suspension, but he requested a personal conversation about the future of the company that bore our family name. "I owe you an apology, Natalie," he said as we sat in his home office, surrounded by photographs and awards that documented 3 generations of Rivers family business history. "I made assumptions about leadership and capability that were based on tradition rather than evidence. I should have recognized your potential years ago." His acknowledgement was more meaningful than any professional recognition I had received because it represented validation from the persons whose approval I had sought throughout my career. "More importantly," he continued, "I'm proud of how you've handled this entire situation. The way you documented Damien's behavior, presented evidence to the board, and managed the company's recovery demonstrates exactly the kind of principled leadership that will honor the Rivers family legacy." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering everything from my childhood ambitions to my plans for the marketing and strategic communications division. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my father saw me as an equal rather than a supporting character in someone else's story. "Take the Meridian Industries offer," he advised as our conversation concluded. "You've earned the opportunity to build something bigger than what we created here, and you have the skills to succeed at that level." The formal announcement of my appointment as CEO of Meridian Industries' Marketing and Strategic Communications Division was made during a press conference that attracted attention throughout the Southwest business community. The story of Rivers and Associates' acquisition and my promotion was covered by every major business publication in the region, positioning me as one of the youngest female CEOs in Arizona's corporate landscape. But the most satisfying moment of the entire transition came during my final week at Rivers and Associates, when I received a phone call from Marcus Webb at Phoenix Creative Group. "Natalie, I have to tell you that your handling of this entire situation has been the talk of the marketing community. The way you turned a family business crisis into a major corporate opportunity is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that defines exceptional leadership."
He paused before adding something that captured the significance of what I had accomplished. "You've essentially created a case study in how to transform professional adversity into career advancement. Business schools are going to be analyzing your strategy for years." As I cleaned out my office at Rivers and Associates and prepared to move into my new executive suite at Meridian Industries, I felt a profound sense of completion rather than ending. The company that had shaped my professional identity would continue to operate successfully under new ownership, while I moved forward to build something larger and more ambitious than I had ever imagined possible. The girl who had been dismissed as unsuitable for family business leadership was about to become one of the most influential marketing executives in the Southwest, with resources and authority that would allow her to shape industry practices for years to come. But the real transformation wasn't professional. It was personal. I had learned to value my own capabilities over other people's approval, to build strategic alliances based on competence rather than family connections, and to turn adversity into opportunity through careful planning and principled action. The foundation I was building was stronger than anything I could have inherited because it was based on merit rather than tradition, on strategic thinking rather than inherited authority. 2 years later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Celestial Dynamics, the marketing conglomerate I had built for Meridian Industries' initial investment, preparing for the most satisfying business meeting of my career. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Austin skyline where we had established our second headquarters, and beyond that, the future I had constructed from the wreckage of family betrayal and professional sabotage. Celestial Dynamics had exceeded every projection Harrison Vale and I had developed during those early acquisition discussions. What began as Meridian Industries' Marketing and Strategic Communications Division had evolved into an independent powerhouse with offices in 3 states, a client roster that included 7 Fortune 500 companies, and annual revenue approaching $50 million. The transformation hadn't happened overnight.
It required 18 months of strategic hiring, operational development, and client relationship building that drew on every lesson I had learned about leadership, integrity, and the difference between inherited authority and earned respect. But each milestone had validated my conviction that competence and ethical business practices would ultimately triumph over politics and manipulation. The irony of my current situation wasn't lost on me as I reviewed the agenda for this morning's meeting. Rivers and Associates, under new management following Damien's permanent removal and subsequent legal difficulties, was struggling to maintain relevance in an increasingly competitive market. Their cash flow problems had worsened, client relationships had deteriorated, and they were now seeking strategic partnerships that might provide the stability they had lost through years of mismanagement. Harrison Vale had forwarded their partnership proposal to me with a note that captured the poetic justice of the situation. Thought you might be interested in this opportunity to work with your former company. They specifically requested a meeting with Celestial Dynamics after seeing our case studies and client testimonials. The proposal itself was professionally written but desperately positioned. Rivers and Associates was offering to serve as a regional implementation partner for Celestial Dynamics' larger campaigns, essentially volunteering to become a subordinate vendor for the company I now led. The financial terms they suggested were favorable to us and clearly reflected their limited negotiating position. But what made the situation truly extraordinary was the fact that Damien would be present for this morning's presentation, not as CEO or decision maker, but as the business development director reporting to the interim leadership team that had replaced him. When the Rivers and Associates delegation arrived at 10 a.m., I watched through my office window as they gathered in our lobby, clearly impressed by the scale and sophistication of what we had built. Our Austin headquarters occupied 2 floors of a premium office tower with modern conference facilities, state-of-the-art technology systems, and the kind of professional atmosphere that immediately communicated success and stability. Damien stood slightly apart from his colleagues, his body language revealing the discomfort of someone who understood exactly how dramatically our relative positions had changed. Gone was the confident authority that once characterized his presence in business settings, replaced by the careful deference of someone who needed this meeting to go well for his own professional survival. I allowed myself a moment of private satisfaction before walking to Conference Room A, the same designation we had used for important meetings at Rivers and Associates, where my team was preparing to evaluate their partnership proposal. "Good morning, everyone," I said as I entered the room, my voice carrying the natural authority that comes from building something excellent rather than inheriting something established. The next hour unfolded with the kind of professional precision that demonstrated everything I had learned about strategic negotiation and relationship management. My team, including Amanda Thornton, who had followed me from Rivers and Associates and now served as our Director of Strategic Partnerships, presented our partnership criteria, performance expectations, and operational requirements with the thoroughness of an organization that could afford to be selective about its business relationships.
Rivers and Associates' presentation was competent, but revealed the limitations of a company operating from weakness rather than strength. Their strategic recommendations lacked the innovation and analytical depth that had once characterized our best work, and their proposed implementation timelines reflected resource constraints that would have been unthinkable during our successful years. But the most telling moment came when Damien attempted to contribute to the discussion about campaign development processes. His suggestions were reasonable but generic, lacking the specific industry insights and client relationship knowledge that had once made our strategic planning effective. "That's an interesting approach," I replied diplomatically when he finished outlining his ideas, "though I think we'll need more sophisticated analytics and performance optimization than what you've described. Our Fortune 500 clients expect strategic frameworks that integrate real-time data analysis with predictive modeling capabilities." The gentle correction highlighted the gap between his current capabilities and the level of expertise required for the kind of work Celestial Dynamics performed routinely. It wasn't personal vindictiveness, it was simply professional reality. During our lunch break, I found myself alone with Damien in the executive dining area.
facing the first private conversation we had shared since his departure from Rivers and Associates. The moment felt surreal, sitting across from someone who had once tried to destroy my career and now needed my approval to salvage his own professional future. "Natalie," he began, his voice carrying none of the dismissive authority I remembered from our final confrontations. "I want you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong. The way I handled our disagreements, the things I said to clients about you, none of that was justified or professional." His apology was more comprehensive than I had expected, acknowledging specific actions and their consequences rather than offering vague regrets about misunderstandings or communication breakdowns. I convinced myself that protecting my position was the same thing as protecting the company. But I realize now that I was just afraid of being overshadowed by someone more capable than I was. Your success here proves that my fears were justified, but my response was completely inappropriate. I studied his face, noting the genuine remorse in his expression, but also recognizing the strategic calculation behind his honesty. Damien needed this partnership to work, which gave his apology practical motivation beyond personal guilt. "I appreciate your acknowledgement," I replied carefully. "The situation at Rivers and Associates was difficult for everyone involved, but I think we can move forward professionally if this partnership makes sense for both organizations." The afternoon session focused on contract terms and operational logistics, with my team outlining performance standards and accountability measures that would ensure successful collaboration. By 4 p.m., we had developed a preliminary framework that would allow Rivers and Associates to serve as a regional implementation partner for specific campaign elements, while Celestial Dynamics retained strategic oversight and client relationship management. It was exactly the kind of arrangement I might have found humiliating 2 years earlier, being reduced to a supporting role in projects led by former colleagues. But for Damien and his team, it represented an opportunity to stabilize their operations and potentially rebuild their reputation through association with our success. As the Rivers and Associates delegation prepared to leave, Harrison Vale stopped by to observe the conclusion of our meetings. His presence provided a perfect reminder of how dramatically circumstances had changed since our initial collaboration. "Natalie, I have to say I'm impressed by how professionally you've handled this entire situation. It would have been easy to let personal history affect your business judgment, but you've evaluated this partnership opportunity based purely on strategic merit." That evening, as I reviewed the preliminary partnership agreement my team had drafted, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years earlier, I had been fighting for professional survival against someone who held every institutional advantage. Now I was evaluating whether to offer that same person an opportunity to participate in the success I had built independently. The transformation felt complete in ways that went beyond professional achievement or financial success. I had proven to myself that competence and integrity were more powerful than manipulation and inherited authority. More importantly, I had built something excellent that belonged entirely to me, something that reflected my own values and strategic vision rather than compromising with other people's limitations. The final email I sent that day was to the entire Celestial Dynamics team, announcing our decision to move forward with the Rivers and Associates partnership, while acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought us to this collaboration. This partnership represents exactly the kind of strategic relationship that strengthens both organizations while maintaining our commitment to excellence and ethical business practices, I wrote. It also demonstrates that professional success is ultimately determined by results and character rather than politics or personal history.
As I turned off my office lights and headed home to the life I had built in Austin, complete with a supportive partner who celebrated my achievements rather than feeling threatened by them, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from transforming adversity into opportunity through strategic thinking and principled action. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so successful that your former opponents have to ask permission to participate in your vision. The girl who had once been told she lacked the leadership presence necessary for executive authority was now leading an organization that set industry standards for strategic excellence and ethical business practices. And that story was just the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.